My name is Harper Parker, and I am 28 years old. And I want to tell you about the woman who sat beside me on a flight from Denver to Boston, and the 7 words she said right before we landed that changed everything I thought I knew about where I came from. I want to start with the birthmark, because the birthmark is where she started, and because without the birthmark, none of what followed would have happened the way it happened. It is a small crescent shape near my left wrist. I have had it my entire life and have never thought much about it beyond occasionally noticing that it catches people's attention when I reach for something. The woman in the seat beside me noticed it about an hour into the flight. I was reaching for my coffee when my sleeve slid back, and she froze in a way that was immediate and unmistakable, a physical response to seeing something she had not expected to see. She looked out the window for 20 minutes after that, without speaking. When the flight attendant returned our boarding passes after a gate issue, she glanced down at mine. She saw my name. Something drained from her face. Real fear, not curiosity, fear. I had been aware of her attention since before we took off. Not constant attention, but enough. Every few minutes, I would look up from my laptop and catch her watching me. She would look away quickly. By the time the fear reached her face after she saw my name, I was paying very close attention. Twice, she opened her mouth. Twice, she stopped herself. Then the captain announced our descent, and passengers began putting things away, and she turned toward me completely. She said, "I am sorry." I asked her why she was apologizing. She asked me, "Was your mother Linda Parker?" My entire body went still. Nobody guessed my mother's name, ever. I stared at her. I asked how she knew her. The woman's hands began trembling. She looked down at her lap. Then she said something that made the floor of the airplane feel like it was no longer where it was supposed to be. She said she had spent 30 years hoping she would find me. Before I could respond, she reached into her purse. Carefully, slowly, she pulled out an old photograph, faded, early 90s, the kind of photograph that has been carried in a wallet or purse for decades rather than kept in an album. A newborn baby wrapped in a yellow blanket, a woman beside the crib crying, another woman standing in the background watching. I recognized the second woman immediately. It was my mother. I flipped the photograph over, handwriting on the back, a date, my birth year, my birth month, my birth week, and where a name should have been, 2 words, Baby A. The plane touched down. Neither of us moved. We ended up in a quiet airport cafe after we disembarked. The woman introduced herself as Mary Ann Cole. She told me her sister's name was Rebecca. Rebecca Cole had been 24 years old when she gave birth at a small private clinic outside Denver. Complications occurred during labor. Rebecca was heavily sedated. When she came around, a doctor told her the baby had not survived. No baby, no funeral, no goodbye, just paperwork and a brief explanation. The clinic did not issue a death certificate. Rebecca asked for one. They did not provide it. Rebecca claimed she had heard a baby crying after the doctor told her the child was gone. Nobody believed her. The nurses attributed it to medication and shock and grief. Her husband believed the doctors. Her family believed the doctors. Everyone believed the doctors, except Rebecca. She never changed her story, not once. For 30 years, she maintained that she had heard her baby crying and that the baby was alive somewhere and that what she had been told was not true. Mary Ann slid the photograph across the cafe table. She said she had carried it for 30 years. The edges were worn smooth from being handled too many times. She asked what date I celebrated my birthday. I told her. She looked away. Her expression was not surprise. It was the particular expression of someone whose worst possibility has been confirmed. She told me my mother's maiden name, Linda Harrison. Very few people knew that name. My father had known it, a few old family friends. It was not the kind of details someone guesses. Mary Ann knew it. She knew it because Rebecca had given it to her. because Rebecca had found it through an investigator she had hired years after the clinic closed. Because Rebecca had spent 30 years not guessing, but actually searching, with documentation and investigators and letters and everything available to a woman who would not accept that her child was gone. I left the cafe and stepped outside. I called my mother. She answered immediately. Her voice sounded normal for about 5 seconds. Then I asked if she had ever heard of Marianne Cole. Silence. Complete and total silence. Then she asked where I was. Not who is Marianne Cole, not why are you asking, just where are you? That frightened me more than any answer could have. My mother did not give me information that phone call. She gave me deflection and then she hung up, and when I tried to call back, the messages stopped delivering. My mother had blocked me. For the first time in 28 years, she had blocked her own daughter's number. Not after arguments, not after difficult conversations, after I said one name, Mary Ann Cole. Panic is not denial. Panic is a person who knows something and is trying to prevent it from being fully known. My mother's response was panic, and panic has a reason. My father texted within an hour, "Do not meet with that woman again." When I asked why, he replied, "Because she wants something." It sounded rehearsed. It sounded like a line they had discussed and agreed on. It sounded like people who had anticipated this conversation without knowing exactly when it would arrive. Marianne sent an email that evening with scanned copies of letters, dozens of them. Letters Rebecca had written over years, addressed to hospitals and lawyers and government offices, all asking the same question: what happened to her baby? Every letter ended without an answer. Halfway through the stack, one sentence stopped me. The baby had a small crescent-shaped mark near her wrist. I looked at my arm, at the mark I had never thought much about. Rebecca had written that detail 30 years ago, and she was right about it. Nobody had told her. Nobody had described it to her. She knew it because she was my mother, and she had seen it when she held me. Mary Ann had located a retired nurse who had worked at the clinic the year I was born. Evelyn Grant, 78 years old, sharp eyes, steady memory. When we met her, she looked at my face and did not say recognition. She said regret. She told us that 2 women had delivered baby girls the same night I was born, Rebecca Cole and Linda Parker. She told us that one missing file had been discovered after the clinic was eventually shut down for unrelated complaints, a file that corresponded to the date I was born. A gap in the record, on the exact night 2 women delivered in the same building. I flew home 2 days after meeting Evelyn. The flight back felt completely different from the flight to Boston because I was no longer the same person who had boarded a plane in Denver, assuming she knew where she came from. I went to the attic the same day I arrived. My childhood home had a storage space above the garage where my mother kept everything: holiday decorations, photo albums, old boxes. I opened them one by one. 3 hours in, I found a yellow baby blanket folded carefully inside a storage box. The blanket looked exactly like the one in Marianne's photograph. I checked the corner, stitched initials, R.C., Rebecca Cole. Beneath the blanket was an envelope, old and yellowed. Inside were letters, dozens of them, every single one addressed to Linda Parker, and every single one signed Rebecca. Not one had gone unanswered because my mother had chosen not to respond. They had gone unanswered because she had made that choice, year after year, for decades. I sat on the attic floor and read them all. Rebecca was not angry in the letters. She was not aggressive or threatening. She asked questions. She described dreams about her daughter. She said she would never stop looking. One letter mentioned that she had come to our house once and knocked on the door. She described the yard. She described the front steps. She said she asked if there had been a mistake and whether anyone would speak with her. I was 6 years old that day, playing inside, a few feet away. My mother had not opened the door. That night, I confronted my father. He did not deny anything. He looked like a man who had been holding something for years and had finally arrived at the place where holding it was no longer possible. He said quietly that he had thought the adoption was legal. Not birth, not daughter, adoption. He told me what had happened. They had wanted a child desperately. The clinic had offered a private arrangement, fast and confidential. He paid cash. He was told paperwork would arrive. It never did. They told themselves not to ask questions. Later, when Rebecca's letters began arriving, my mother discovered that what had been presented to them as a proper adoption was not one. She had read every letter. She knew Rebecca was searching. She chose silence, every year, for decades. 3 weeks after Mary Ann and I completed a DNA test, the results arrived on a Thursday morning. I opened them alone at my kitchen table, with my hands not quite steady. One line: close biological relationship confirmed. Mary Ann was my aunt, Rebecca was my biological mother, and Linda Parker was the woman who had raised me but had not given birth to me and had known that a woman named Rebecca had been searching for me for 30 years and had chosen, consistently and deliberately, not to tell me. I sat with the results for a long time. Rebecca had died several years before the flight. Mary Ann gave me her final letter at our next meeting, the last one Rebecca had ever written. I opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was careful and clear. She had written before she died, not with anger, not with bitterness, with hope. One sentence in particular: "If my daughter is alive, tell her I never stopped looking." I cried harder reading that letter than I had at any point in the previous weeks, because the sentence told me something I had not known I needed to know. I was not abandoned. I was lost. There is a specific and important difference between those two things, and the difference had mattered to Rebecca enough that she had spent 30 years trying to close it and had written it down in a final letter before she died. People assume I cut Linda out of my life entirely after everything I discovered. My relationship with her is more complicated than that. She raised me. She read me bedtime stories and sat through fevers and helped with homework and was present for the ordinary accumulation of a life. Those memories are real. They belong to me. I am not going to pretend they do not exist because the story behind them was not what I believed. But so was Rebecca. So was Mary Ann. So was the truth, and I had lived for 28 years without the full truth, and I was not willing to continue living without it. A year after the flight from Denver, I visited Rebecca's grave. I brought yellow flowers and the photograph Mary Ann had carried for 30 years. I sat for a long time and talked to someone who never got to hear my voice. I thanked her, not because she found me, because she never stopped trying. The woman in seat 14 beside me did not destroy my life. She restored a missing part of it. She gave me back a chapter that someone had removed before I was old enough to know it existed. My mother believed the secret would stay buried forever. Instead, it crossed the country in the seat beside me and landed at 30,000 feet, wearing a gray blazer and carrying an old photograph and the record of 30 years of a woman who refused to stop. Because sometimes the truth does not arrive with sirens. Sometimes it arrives as a stranger on a plane who spent 30 years hoping she would find you and almost did not say anything. And then she did, and everything changed. That is my story. Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.